With hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is a very cool topic. It has 6 nuclei. How to remember the 6 nuclei? So I will tell you it's a head ganglion of ANS, okay, autonomic system. It's a really important topic, because it really regulates a lot of things, okay. It has 6 function. First is circadian rhythm, second is food intake, regulation of body temperature, regulation of sleep and wakefulness, role in memory, a very big role in memory, endocrine function is really huge. Okay, so really big topic. Let's try to understand it. Okay, so thalamus is here, structure present beneath it is hypothalamus. That's why it's named hypothalamus. 6 functions. These are the 6 functions. What about the nuclei? Well, these are the name of nuclei. Okay, for example, we have 6 nuclei. First nuclei is supraoptic. I made this figure for myself so that I can understand this. 6 nuclei. Supraoptic. So supra, it means here. So supraoptic nuclei is here. This is not anatomically right. This is not physiologically right. This is only the way I remember it. Okay. The only way I understand it. Okay. For example, we have something called as lateral nuclei. So lateral nuclei is right there on the lateral. This is medial. Okay, this is lateral. So we have lateral nuclei. We have supraoptic nuclei. We have something called as ventromedial midline nuclei here. Ventromedial midline. Then we have something called as paraventricular nuclei. This is paraventricular nuclei. And then we have something called a posterior nuclei, and then we have anterior nuclei. So we got 6 nuclei: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. This is not representative of physiology or anatomy. This is not right. This is just the way I remember it. Okay. So let's start with the function right away. First, number 1 function is making sure you guys have good circadian rhythm. What is circadian rhythm? It's just you guys have a master clock. You wake up in morning and you sleep in the night. You do it properly, your body will be right. So circadian rhythm, master clock, it is done via suprachiasmatic nuclei, SCN. Okay, so suprachiasmatic nuclei, SCN. Okay, so cool. Synchronize your 24-hourly bodily function. Cool. What about regulation of food intake when you feel hungry or not hungry? Okay, so there's something called as arcuate nucleus. It's like an arc. Okay, so arcus means a bow, like this. This is arc, and this is like the thread which is between this. Okay, so arcus. So arcuate nucleus, it's a cluster of neurons sitting on arced arrangement along the base of third ventricle. What else was on the third ventricle? Do you guys remember? In the last topic, we covered this thing called mammillary body. So mammillary body is also present on the floor of third ventricle, and arcuate nucleus is also present on the third floor of base of third ventricle. So third ventricle holds a lot of things for your memory. If you guys have any sort of obstruction in your ventricle, it means this obstruction will lead to some sort of memory impairment. Okay, so it's an integration point. What happens is that it integrates. What does it integrate? It integrates these messengers. Okay, what happens that arcuate via neuropeptide Y, NPY, and agouti related peptide, AGRP. Via these two, it hits something called as lateral nucleus. So here it is lateral. And this lateral nucleus via something called as orexin neurotransmitter, I simply called it Oreo. I just remember that Oreo. Whenever I see an Oreo, I want to eat it. So you want to eat. So it increases food intake. So if we lay down, we eat more. It means L stands for lateral, L stands for lay down. That's how I remember. Lateral nucleus is for eating. What about another one? There's something called as alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone. Alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone. It is stimulating MSH. Okay, it is stimulating the melanocytes. What about other thing is cocaine amphetamine regulated transcript. It's called CAR. And usually what it does is that it hits something called as ventromedial nucleus, VMN. Okay, and it's a satiety center. It makes you feel full. So it reduces the food intake, okay? Ventromedial nucleus, okay? So whenever we stand ventrally, we want to eat less, right? Whenever we lay down, we want to eat more. So that's the concept. No, it's not a concept, it's just the way I remember it. Third is regulation of body temperature. If you guys have hot temperature, you're feeling hot, again, you're in summers, you're in India, and what happens that anterior nucleus, okay, anterior nucleus, it turns on the AC and your body cools down. So what happens? Your body starts sweating, a lot of vasodilation, thirst via osmoreceptors. So anterior nucleus, AC, for cooling down. What about cold? You're in Kazakhstan. A lot of time you're in Astana, like minus 44 degrees centigrade. Posterior nucleus, your ass is warm. Again, you start shivering. Your vasoconstriction happens. Urinary frequency increases. Why you want to pee more? Well, there's something called as cold, and that cold leads to vasoconstriction. The blood shifts from peripheral system to the central system, right? Due to cold, because your body, you want to save this blood, right? So the perfusion of your kidney drops, okay? And this RAS system also drops, and ADH system also drops. So urinary system, it increases, okay? So this is posterior nucleus is for shivering, okay, and posterior nucleus is for heat generation, anterior nucleus is for heat dissipation. Other thing is called regulation of sleep wakefulness. Awake arousal state, you want to feel that. What happens that lateral nucleus makes you feel awake because you want to eat. When you want to be awake to eat that Oreo, okay? What about the thing is posterior nucleus, it's called, it works via histamine, and histamine also makes you want to be awake, okay? And histaminergic neuron live in something called as tuberomammillary neurons of posterior hypothalamus, and this histamine is formed there, and via the H1 receptors it excites and it depolarizes you. So histamine depolarizes you. It really makes you feel awake, okay? So if you are giving any sort of histamine blockers, you will feel sleepy. Sleep center at your hypothalamus is something called as ventrolateral preoptic nucleus, okay? So ventrolateral preoptic, VLP on, okay? It's sleep, it's for sleep in the night, right? So ventral preoptic nucleus, you guys know this, it's for sleep. What about the thing? There's something called as suprachiasmatic nucleus. So this nucleus is for circadian rhythm, and this nucleus called ventrolateral preoptic nucleus is for is for sleeping. It works via GABA or galanin. Both of them are inhibitory, okay? Other thing is called memory. So hypothalamus has something called as mammillary body, right? Here it is, the mammillary body. So hypothalamus has something called as entorhinal cortex, and it is something called as mammillary body. So this mammillary body, it is a pair of structure, right, found in hypothalamus, and it works in the Pepys circuit. We already talked about Pepys circuit. Let's go to the Pepys circuit again. Cingulate gyrus gives cingulum gives entorhinal leads to hippocampus leads to mammillary, not hypothalamus. I'm so sorry. Hippocampus. So hippocampus gives us fornix gives us mammillary body. Mammillary body is present in hypothalamus. That's why we call it mammillary thalamic tract. And then we have something called as anterior nucleus of thalamus. So it's really important for your emotions and your memory, and then it goes back to the cingulate cortex where it integrates all of this mess together. So that's the whole concept of mammillary body and memory, right? What about this syndrome called Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome? Well, Wernicke was another guy and Korsakoff was a Russian guy. So this was actually two different syndromes previously, but then they joined these syndromes together. So Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome is when there are gaps in your memory. Okay, so filling in the memory gaps. Okay, there are memory gaps. I'll tell you why it happens. Filling in memory gaps with made up information but plausible information. Okay, we call this anterograde amnesia. Okay, and it is why it's happening. It happens because the prefrontal cortex, the prefrontal part of your brain, keeps firing, and then this auto completion by damaged memory cell happen. So the guy is not trying to lie, okay, to you, but he's lying because he has no idea. So this is called honest lying. It's called confabulation, not confusion. It's called confabulation. It's one of the triad of Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome. Other part is confusion. Other part is ataxia. He can't walk because he's drunk. Okay. So why is he drunk? He's drunk because he has been living in Russia. Okay. So chronic alcoholism. Wernicke-Korsakoff, drunk guy in Russia. Chronic alcoholism, memory impaired, degeneration of memory bodies. We need memory for memory bodies. Presentations, it presents with Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome. Other part is endocrine function. The endocrine function has 4 parts in it. First is releasing hormone, inhibiting hormone, paraventricular nucleus, supraoptic nucleus. Okay, so releasing hormone, it's usually hypothalamus releases something called as corticotropin releasing hormone. After that, it leads to anterior pituitary, and then anterior pituitary leads to adrenocortical, and then it usually leads to adrenal cortex, and then cortisol eventually releases cortisol, which is a stress hormone. Inhibiting hormones such as dopamine, it inhibits prolactin because prolactin is really not high in volume, so you want to have brakes on your prolactin, so that's why you need dopamine. Other part is something called as paraventricular nucleus. So paraventricular nucleus, it majorly produces oxytocin and it minorly produces ADH, and supraoptic produces ADH and minorly produces oxytocin. So both of them are released in posterior pituitary. That's very important. And this dopamine is released via anterior pituitary. And by the way, if the stalk of your pituitary gland is messed up, what will happen is that the communication of dopamine to your anterior pituitary will be damaged, and then all of a sudden your prolactin levels will be shoot up, and all of the other hormones from your anterior pituitary will sunk down. So this usually happens when you guys have any sort of stalk problem in your anterior pituitary. One other thing you can see, by the way, we call this hypothalamic pituitary axis because hormones are made up in hypothalamus. This is the stalk of the pituitary. This is anterior pituitary. This is posterior pituitary. So we call this hypothalamic pituitary axis. Okay, that's it. It's nothing is really complex. So it works via negative feedback loop because we don't want to bombard yourself with a lot of hormones. One other thing is that hypothalamus has something called as dorsomedial nucleus. So in hypothalamus, there are a lot of nucleuses, and it's really hard to remember all of these nucleuses. But as long as we keep revising them, we can really keep them on our tips. So hypothalamus has something called as dorsomedial nucleus, and this dorsomedial nucleus actually results in something called a sham rage. It's dorsomedial nucleus. What happens is that whenever you try to touch a stray cat, what happens is that a rage is shown by the cat. There will be a lot of hissing, there will be a lot of biting, there will be a lot of arcing of the back. The cat is really ready. So it is done via hypothalamic. Usually why humans don't have it, because cerebral cortex inhibits this dorsomedial nucleus, and then we don't show sham range. A lot of people show sham range, by the way. So if someone show you sham range, by the way, this guy has no cerebral cortex probably, and it inhibits this hypothalamus, and then you guys have sham range. If your thalamus cortex is removed, we call this decortication. If it's done, you guys will be experiencing or be presenting with sham range. So that was whole hypothalamus. So hypothalamus has 6 points, 6 functions, 6 nuclei: supraoptic, lateral, posterior, anterior, ventromedial, and paraventricular. So this is, well, hypothalamus has a lot of nucleuses. It has something called as this satiety, ventromedial, lateral, oraxin, What else? What else? What else? What else? The really important one, sleep center, is ventrolateral pre-optic nucleus. So the more you revise this, the more we remember this. So that's the whole story of hypothalamus.